Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you all for joining today. I'm Marisa with MassChallenge Texas. Today we will be hearing from a group of panelists that can provide insight on what it's like to graduate from an accelerator. Whether you're about to leave an accelerator or you're thinking of joining one, this event can provide a lot of valuable insight on the various paths that you can take as a founder. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few things. So on October 22nd, we are hosting our very first 2020 MassChallenge Virtual US Awards. I'm excited to announce that we will have Ariana Huffington, who's the founder of the Huffington Post and Thrive Global, as our keynote speaker. Chris Denson, who is the creator of Innovation Crush, will be our moderator, and Linda Pizzuti of the Boston Globe will also be headlining. Make sure to register for free at masschallenge.org to find out which top finalists will be awarded up to $2 million in equity-free cash prizes. I would also like to take a moment to thank all of our founding civic and corporate partners that have supported MassChallenge Texas throughout the years. Without them, none of this could be possible, so thank you for helping us make startups win. And also, I encourage everyone to stay until the very end of our event. After the discussion, we will open the floor to the audience for a Q&A. At the end, Victoria will select whoever asks the best question, and they will win a $25 gift card. And one last thing, if you haven't already, please make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe to our newsletter for all the latest updates. So now I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Victoria Aldridge. She is the founder of Truffled, a startup and innovation fanatic. She's a prominent speaker, writer, and journalist, and her work has been featured in the BBC News, NBC Today, and Yahoo and the Huffington Post. So welcome, Victoria.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And since you already gave a great intro, I won't dig too much further into that. But yes, I am actually on the heels of launching my own endeavor, Truffled. It's a media platform. It's a digital content, starting with a digital content newsletter for women. So if anyone's interested, you can subscribe now. We'll launch in the next few weeks. And yeah, I've been in the startup arena for quite some time. I also support a women-led VC here in the Austin area that focuses on sustainability and consumer health. And then I'm also an advisor and participate as a board member with companies as well. So I'm excited to be here. I've been, quite in the know with the main accelerators around the country that you hear about, from Techstars to Y Combinator and a lot of sub accelerators and incubators. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with what I've learned so far about MassChallenge. And I really like that they're taking such a grassroots approach to supporting and launching startups. And it's much more comprehensive than what I've seen at a lot of other accelerators. So big kudos for MassChallenge. So let's get to the rest of our panel. We have here Farhaj Mayan. He's the CEO of Canna, which is a cannabis company. And I'll have each of our panelists dig a bit deeper in a moment into what they're doing. We have Adam Littman, who's a managing partner of Ecliptic Capital. We have Rochelle Cahan, who is the CEO of Collective Liberty. And we have Mandeep Patel, who is the CEO and founder of Electrip and Sunco. And then we have Brian Borak, who's a co-founder of Relay IQ. And each of our panelists have quite a bit of extensive, interesting background. I'm gonna let them dive a little bit deeper. And as you dive a little bit deeper into what your experience has been with your startup, I'd like you to also go into the ways in which MassChallenge has supported the trajectory of the growth of your company. So let's start with Farhaj.
Hey everyone, and thanks for the awesome introduction, Victoria. My name is Farhaj, I'm the CEO of Canna, and we're building a single system for legal cannabis businesses to hire, train, and manage their workforce. We're live in Oklahoma right now, running pilots with a lot of large farms over here, helping upskill the next generation of people who get to work in the legal cannabis industry. Fortunately, I had the chance to go through MassChallenge unconventionally twice with both of my companies. The first one, Fade, which was a personalized barber booking marketplace that we launched in Dallas, grew to early revenue, and ultimately ended up winding down. And then the second one being Canna. From my perspective, I think MassChallenge was amazing because when I first joined, I was a college student who just dropped out to work on his company full time. And I essentially got to go through a fast-tracked MBA program in a couple of months that just taught me the nuts and bolts of building a business. So super excited to be here. And yeah, looking forward to this awesome conversation.
Thanks, Farhaj. And then how about Rochelle? Let's go over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rochelle. I'm the founder and CEO of Collective Liberty. We are a national anti-trafficking nonprofit. And before I started Collective Liberty, I was a prosecutor in Philadelphia. I became a DA the same year that human trafficking became a crime. So it was brand new. We didn't know how to investigate it, how to prosecute it. And when I learned through that process is we need a lot of help. So I started Collective Liberty to give that help so that individual prosecutors and cops weren't sort of trying to solve the entire global human trafficking problem alone in a vacuum, but that we can work together. And I'm really excited to talk through that process. MassChallenge, similar to what Farhaj said, was a fast track MBA. So I had the legal background, obviously, but I was like, I'm a nonprofit, so I'm also a little bit weird for this space. And I was like, okay, I don't know exactly what even a venture capitalist is. And turns out it's not really relevant to a nonprofit, but there's other lessons you can learn from that process that is relevant and applicable. So I learned a ton, and nonprofits don't normally have access to that kind of education. So it was incredibly valuable for us.
Awesome. Thanks, Rochelle. And then Brian?
Sure. My name is Brian Borak. I was the CEO of Relay IQ. We were acquired on December 31st at 8 p.m. at night. So that was my New Year's gift to ourselves. Took January 1st off, first time in 2 years.
Yes.
We were trying to solve, we still are trying to solve, we'll solve the challenge of getting insights out of data for action. I'll describe more about what we do during this phone call. 20 years in IT, 2 startups, big company experience. I'm a mentor, I'm an investor, all those good things. Had an unconventional exit both times, actually. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Brian. And then how about Mandeep?
Hi, everybody. My name is Mandeep Patel. I am a University of Texas engineer. And before startups, I was a huge corporate guy. I worked at United, BP, Lockheed. Found that those companies moved a little too slow for me, just a touch. And so I decided to venture out and do my own thing. We launched a company called Sunco, which was a hardware solar tracking startup. And we did not do enough customer discovery. And we ultimately discovered there's no need for that. But it was a cool idea. And that gave me the skills necessary to launch Electrip. So with Electrip, we're laying out the groundwork for self-driving autonomous electric vehicle fleets. Our whole goal right now is to make electric vehicles a profitable and valuable service for both the customers and investors. So we take people city to city, door to door in private, professionally driven Teslas. The company is completely self-funded. So that's caused us to, unlike a lot of other transportation companies, not just throw money at the problem. And that has caused us to create some really innovative solutions for things like how to park and charge electric vehicles, how to borrow cars from current owners, and things like that. So that's helped our core business grow without having to constantly raise capital.
Great, thanks, Mandeep. And Adam, can you go into a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Lippman. So my background is actually in molecular biology, and then went and did an MBA. But I spent 13 years in big pharma, big biotech, making mostly oncology drugs at Genentech, and then took a really strange turn to move into software and software services. In the startup space, both as a CEO and a COO. Had the fortunate outcome of a good exit with the software services firm to Accenture in 2015. And one of the things that I learned during that process was just how difficult it was to move from kind of that idea phase into a scaling business, and the challenges a lot of entrepreneurs faced. And through that process, me and some of my partners from my software startup actually formed a venture firm to try and solve it at scale, and also introduce more risk capital into the broader Texas scene, as Texas in general is highly undercapitalized.
Great, thanks everybody. So let's dive in a little bit to some broader questions here that I think everyone is navigating to some extent or another, the elephant in the room, COVID. Mandeep, you had mentioned offline some of the ways that you've had to become a little bit more resourceful and somewhat, maybe even make some micro pivots, if I can even say that. Can you dig a little bit more into how you've adapted?
So in January, February, we were 3.5x year-over-year growth. I was feeling really good about hitting $500,000 in gross revenue this year, up from 150-ish last year. And we had a lot of contracts on the table too. So we had contracts with big companies here in Houston, and everything was looking great. And I was like, yeah, this is awesome. But then COVID hit, and it was like right on my birthday when like March 15th, and then COVID hit. April, no revenue. May, no revenue. June, no revenue. Finally, in July, we started to kick back with a lot of pivots that we made. And really, here's what it took for us to kind of survive that, right? So first and foremost, we had to do what all the startups had to do, cut costs, make sure that we were able to have enough cash flow to get through it. And then second, we had to go back to our customers and just ask, what is it that you need from us right now? That was super important for us to understand. And the only way we did it was honestly by going up to them and saying, look, this is what we can offer. And like, what do you need? Like, we'll build it for you if you need it. So that's when we started talking to oil and gas companies. People were having to life flight off of rigs because people were getting COVID. So in order to fly to a rig, you know, there were at least 75 different contact points, different people. So it was impossible to follow and contact. With Electrip, it's just one driver. We test them weekly. So we found that as an option. Another thing we had to understand was how to manage the team at a time like this. That was really tough because all of a sudden you don't see the same momentum moving forward, and it becomes even more important for your team to really believe in the mission and what you're trying to do. And this will happen even without COVID. There are times when your business will not see the consistent growth that makes people feel happy about what they're doing. And so as a CEO, that's something that I learned how to do a lot better. It was very, very good for me to go through this now at a younger age. And I think it's important for everybody to keep that in mind. The last thing to keep in mind is, honestly, if your company is going to go to shit, which is what mine did, don't hold anything back. Like, just do whatever you can. So what we started to do was crazy stuff, right? So we started pretending we were from the University of Texas COVID research team, and we'd get the cheapest flight ticket possible and go to the gates between Houston and Dallas. And I would go up to people with ThinkPads, because I know they're business travelers, and say, hey, would you be down for a quick survey, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd hand them a card about Electrip. And we got a couple customers like that. And in those moments, it was really clear for us to understand it's not about getting back to $500,000 in revenue. It's about getting enough demand so that you can make it past this. And so we very easily quantified, and I told my team, I was like, look, guys, we're going to talk to 10 people. 9 of them are going to say no. That is just the reality of it. But we only need 3 people per month from each of us in order to get our business going. And so that's, I guess, the 3 lessons that we learned was 1, talk to your customers and build what they want. 2, understand that your team is going to be dragging, and you need to make it very clear to them why it's important and how little you really need to get through this. And then number 3 was, don't hold anything back. Do whatever you can, because if the company dies, the company dies. So you might as well just do whatever.
Awesome. Love that. Spoken like a true startupper. I want to switch over to Faraj real quick, because you had mentioned also in the past that you've been navigating the same thing with traction. I mean, every startup is going to navigate traction issues at different junctures. But during this time specifically, can you talk a little bit more to some of the solutions that you've been implementing in your traction challenges?
Yeah, for sure. Funny enough, like one thing I was telling my investors is COVID kind of saved our company. We were definitely growing really fast, but it didn't mean that we had our business fundamentals or unit economics and a lot of our operational stuff going on really on lockdown because we were just seeing month over month growth, and we were trying to keep up with demand. What happened is, as soon as COVID hit, is overnight, a lot of how we were deploying workers initially was we would invite them to in-person training sessions and teach them the job. And that disappeared. We couldn't get more than 10 people within one area. And similarly, cannabis sales started to skyrocket. So a lot of our existing customers started to bifurcate their workforce, have full-time workers focused on a lot of the higher level tasks, and hire, outside talent to help with the repetitive work so they could get through as much as projects as fast as possible. So we were kind of facing 2 problems. One is inbound sales started to go that way, and then the ability to upskill workers and deploy them was going this way. And essentially 2 things happened is we had our aha moment to where we were like, well, we have all of this amazing, in-person curriculum that we've designed for training. Why don't we go to the location in one of our farms, record some content, upload it online, and have this like direct-to-consumer education platform where workers could hop on and get enough context so that they show up to their first day and know what's going on, and then they can get trained on site for an hour. after they meet all of the COVID compliance that we needed and had their test ready. That was a hit. We got like almost 1,000 applicants who wanted to get on the platform, get upskilled, and we had a really solid supply side of labor that we could deploy. And it's turned into one of our core products now, and we're making a really big bet on it. The second thing that essentially happened is we were, kind of experimenting very frequently with our financial model. Initially we started off with the labor marketplace model, but we realized the unit economics weren't good and we can scale it fast enough. And then we tried a monthly subscription model, and then we're like, oh, well, these farms have really infrequent harvest cycles, so that's not really matching up to them. And what happened was one of our customers just called us and said, hey, I really don't want to worry about finding labor. I like working with y'all. Can I just pay for a whole contract for a whole year to source labor from you, and you just automate fulfillment and add insurance? And, we had our second aha moment. And then over the next 3 months, we went from about like 5K in ARR or MRR to 45 to now we're on track to hit $100,000 in annual revenue. So it was really interesting. I think what happened was, outside of that, the investors that were coming in to fund our pre-seed round, had to kind of back away and reinvest to keep their current portfolio companies alive. So we had this opportunity to really fix a lot of the nuts and bolts of what was going on in the company, bring the wheels back onto the bus. And then when we went out to raise again, we found some incredible partners who came on and were really bullish on where we were headed. So yeah, it was a really interesting, fast-paced pivot. Unfortunately, I had team members who could keep up.
Yeah, so speaking of that, and another problem that everyone actually wants to have, switching completely gears over to Rochelle, is fast growth. How you're navigating really, kind of pronounced exponential growth. And you referenced that you were growing quite quickly, even through COVID over the past 6 months or so, but that you weren't really necessarily having trouble acclimating to the growth, but it was something you were trying to kind of counsel and coach your team through. So how has the more pronounced growth and your team adjusting to that impacted your leadership and your leadership style? Has that changed? What are you kind of learning about yourself along the way?
Absolutely. So COVID for us was also a blessing in disguise, because the pace was becoming like I was in the middle of a snowball that was just completely out of control. And I was like, oh my God, how do we manage this growth without just growing too fast? How do I keep my sanity? How do I keep my team's sanity? And the immediate solution is like, oh, you got funds, hire new people. But then every person you hire, there's the onboarding process, the training process. And I mean, there's only so much capacity for that as well. So I definitely shouldn't complain. It's all really good problems to have. And COVID honestly just created more demand for trafficking, not less. We needed mass production. Our supply chain started breaking down. And how do you quickly and rapidly replace that? Exploited labor workforce people, really exploitative hours and wages and conditions. So if anything, COVID just like really illustrated how much trafficking is happening in the United States, and it didn't slow down the demand by any stretch. So we really did lean in, and we had some digital pivots as well, where some of our offerings moved online that were in person, but quite a bit of what we had was online. And then some of the concerns were like, okay, if we expand access more rapidly than we planned, how do we keep it all secure? How do we make sure we don't get hacked? How do we make sure that that growth is also happening responsibly? And then like the team is human, right? So COVID's happening. We are already a fully remote team before COVID. So you would think that, oh, great, we're already that way. But it's almost worse because we didn't have that in-person relationship building before everyone went remote. So it's hard to be like lean on each other now in a personal way on top of a professional way. So it has been a lot of flexing into leadership skills for me that were not my strong suit. My partner that he's really good with people. I'm really good with like facts. And so we were a good balance for each other. But then what happens if he's struggling and I need to help him and pull the weight of like all the emotional stuff with the team that like really is taxing on me. So I've been forced into the deep end a lot on the leadership stuff at the personnel level. And I'm kind of grateful that it happened in a year where the pace was forcibly slowed, because even if the demand was high, for a couple months, travel was just not happening, right? So at least for a couple months, I was home instead of having 3 packed suitcases that I was alternating between, which was what my pace was before COVID. So it also highlighted for me, I'm like self-aware enough to know I'm not perfect, but it highlighted how much work needs to happen in some areas, and maybe I should speed that process along. And I think that in a lot of ways, I'm so grateful that we had staple funding that was committed for a year before COVID happened. And also the whole team, we were having some discussion on like really needed to empower them around the mission. And we're watching in real time how much human trafficking is embedded in every system of the United States, and watching in real time when a pandemic happens, who is punished the most. And it's those people that we're fighting for every day. So that was kind of built into our model and our mission, which I think has helped pull us through some of these rough patches imposed by COVID, that like, look, our work is now more important than it ever was before. So that has been really helpful. But yeah, I've definitely had to lean into the interpersonal stuff and lean on my board quite a bit. Like I definitely was close to burnout last month I was like, I'm pulling a lot more weight than I anticipated on the programmatic side, because so much is shifting that I can't just expect newcomers to figure it out. Like it's falling on me as the startup entrepreneur or whatever. So that was already enough. And then all of the emotional stuff that I tried to hire people to balance out for me was still falling on my plate. So I definitely leaned on my board, and thank God they like stepped in and helped with some of the stuff that I was like, look, I'm going to burn out and it's not a good time for me to burn out. I need your help. So I'm, I guess, proud of myself for having that humility of like raising my hand and being like, guys, like I need you to help, and grateful that they did. We also really learned that we needed different members on the board that had different expertise than we had prioritized before, so that when I needed maybe programmatic help, which you shouldn't always lean on the board for, but as a startup it happens, that we had like really strong veteran business people on the board as well that could weather the storm when we're like steering the ship so sharply, unexpectedly. So that's also helped our board recruitment process. And I think that this has forced a lot of growth on us, and we're really grateful for it. And it wouldn't have happened, I think, had COVID not happened. So it's making us a lot stronger into 2021 than we would have been otherwise.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I think, you know, one of the hardest things to do, especially when you have always had an entrepreneurial mindset and you start something of your own, is it's like growing your own little seed from scratch. You know, it's like having a child. It's akin to all of these things that you're so invested in that it can be hard, especially depending on what type of personality you have in parallel, to delegate and to know where your shortcomings are and hire for those gaps immediately. Hey, I'm really not great for this. This is my first hire. It's exactly in all the areas that we need now to scale, but I don't know how to do it. And to really kind of come to terms with those things, I think is the hardest thing. And I think it really stifles a lot of entrepreneurs. I've probably done it to myself in the past too. But it's a great thing to learn along the way. And I think you're more empowered for it. So
Totally.
So Brian, so when we talk about exits, you know, a lot of companies, a lot of accelerators, a lot of investors, conventional investors, fortunately, Adam is not a conventional investor. We'll get to him in a second again. But you know, a lot of them are asking, they want their 10x return right away. They want to know what your exit plan is before you've even gotten your first customer. And a lot of times I think that's really restricting for a lot of entrepreneurs. And I think it turns away a lot of entrepreneurs now to seek other, you know, alternative methods of funding and going different directions. But, you know, for you, you had a really unconventional exit. And I think it's actually really inspiring because it gives people kind of the idea that you stay the course and you do what you're doing and you never know what's going to come up when you're open-minded to other things. So can you dig a bit more into your, you know, your surprising exit?
So I'm sure where many of you sit, where, you know, raise a little bit of seed money, our investors, as you said, want to get a big return. My mindset was stick the course, you know, grind it out and win huge or die. I think through MassChallenge, actually speaking with other mentors and going to sessions, my mind was broadened to say, you know, there's other ways for success than just a massive exit. And in fact, massive exits are really rare that people really don't talk about. There's lots of other positive outcomes than a huge exit. So I was open to opportunities along the way. So I took a call from a recruiter for an executive role at a company. And I said, sure, I'll talk. So first I was open to having that conversation. In the prior month, I probably would have said, no, I'm only focused on my startup. I won't even answer the call. So I took the call. And literally 3 months later, the company wanted to hire me and bought my startup because the alignment of what we're building and the team I had and their corporate vision was perfect. You know, at the time, my investors did promise me more funding to keep us going as we went to raise another round of financing. But it was the end of December. You know, raising money into the year is tough. And literally at the final hour, I called one of our investors, and I walked him through the scenario of, you know, the plan, the offer, the comp plans for myself and my team, this company's strategy, the roles we're playing. And he literally said to me, "Don't be stupid, take the deal." And I was kind of shocked. Like, I thought he would say, you know, here's more money, keep on going, fight it out. But he said, no, just take the deal, you know, pay us all back our money with a little upside. We're happy for you. In fact, they told me, if you ever want to raise money again, call us first. Because you always had in a scenario for us, the huge exit, but you found the plan that would actually give us a return that we wanted, not what we wanted, but a return. And most entrepreneurs don't even think that way. So they were actually, then COVID hit, and they called me and said, thank you for doing that. And you can't expect, you know, what was going to happen. But yeah, I took a phone call and it worked out great. So now, you know, we have a dream scenario where, you know, a bigger company that I'm running most of it, that's besides the point, but they fully funded our product vision for the year. So my engineering team is really happy to build a product we always wanted to go build. And we kind of rolled our upside into this bigger company's upside. So really all things, now of course there's politics involved in a bigger company, and I shield my team from all of that. But everyone's overall really happy with the scenario. And it's because mostly I said yes to a phone call from a recruiter, and then, you know, the unconventional exit occurred, and everyone is happy, you know, post exit, and we're driving to build our product, and it's a cornerstone now of our new company strategy. So I think, but again, I almost said no until the mentor told me to not, because you get so ingrained in your baby that I birthed this thing over 2 years, and I grinded for it, and I see the market, and I see the big exit. And you tend to say and believe, you have to believe in yourself to do this kind of thing. But to the outsider, I trusted to say, here's, like, let me shine a light on the reality of the world, and it's okay, go do it. So that's kind of, you know, and the more I've learned from the entrepreneurs who exited, a lot of them exit with small exits or upside later or rolled into the next thing. And they don't talk about that. No one talks about their actual exit, typically, and how big it was or how small it was. So that's my story.
That's an awesome story. I just love that, because that's, I haven't heard of one quite executed that way before. And I'm so used to hearing a lot more of the rigid kind of structured exits. So I love that. And it's actually inspired me to be more open-minded as well to alternative channels. So let's go over to Adam. So what I love about what Adam's doing at Ecliptic is, I mean, most of us now, if you're like you guys on the panel, we've all been exposed to a number of investors by now. I've met with hundreds of them, many of them on the East and West Coast, to be honest, because that's where a lot of the capital has traditionally been and still sits. But, you know, a lot of them, and I'm not, the investors are great, but there are a spectrum of them. And I'm happy to see kind of a new model emerging, at least through what Adam's described with Ecliptic, because he's really bringing in different verticals in terms of infrastructure that are much more conducive, I think, to supporting entrepreneurs in a more robust way in terms of local government infrastructures, to the academic world, and really kind of tying all of those together to support the entrepreneur. And they're very diligent too in the way they nurture the relationship over time before they really kind of solidify something with an entrepreneur. So Adam, can you dig more into that with some granularity?
Yeah, happy to. So it kind of starts with what I observed early on, right? We saw entrepreneurs as they moved out from idea into marketed product and started to achieve revenue, that there was a tendency to struggle with that next stage. And so what we first thought was, hey, what if we with our own sort of portfolio of random assorted toys, so to speak, of things we'd accumulated through our private investment, what if we really stepped in and leaned in there and tried to help? And part of that is like, you can't help unless there's trust, right? Like, part of what gets really screwed up in a lot of the financing relationships is there never was that trust, and there never will be that trust. And once a quarter, you get together for a board meeting and you go over metrics, and if you don't meet the metrics, you get beat up, and if you do meet the metrics, congratulations, keep going. And what we decided was actually a couple of things. One, it feels like the success rate is just wrong. And a lot of that has to do not with idea or even timing, but execution. And so if we can help on the execution side, which kind of cuts across industries, then we can increase the batting average, so to speak. And a 1x return, meaning return of basis, is a success. That's a success, right? And so first is redefining success. Mm-hmm. Second is that getting shoulder to shoulder and helping. And that doesn't mean like I'm going to be full-time CFO for a company, but it means like being in enough to know what's going on, and you're never surprised going into a board meeting because you've been helping to keep them out of the ditch. That is way more effective, because especially at the early stage, the most precious resources are time and capital. Your time and the scarce capital that you have. And as you spend that making the easy things hard, right? You end up in a ditch, and it's way more expensive to pull you out. So the idea is, if we can help you to see around the corner, if we can help you focus on the things that are important, and those are usually the things that you said are important, not we said are important, right? Then what ultimately happens is your time and capital are better spent. And so it takes longer, though. We have to establish a relationship early on before we invest, because it has to be, the affinity has to be bidirectional. We can't just be like, we like what you're doing, here's some money, and sort of foie gras capitalism, venture capital, right? We're going to stuff cash down your throat, and out comes a wonderful return. No, it has to be both ways, because there has to be trust, or we can't get kind of into the dirty, nasty problems. And I guess ultimately what we've adopted as a philosophy is the idea of stage appropriate people, process, and technology. So what does that mean? It means, look, you don't want too much process too early on. You don't want like really robust systems too early on. That's a misspend of money. It constrains your creativity. Some of those pivots that you talked about would be constrained by the money you already spent and the thinking that's embedded in that. So, but getting the right amount at the right time means that you can make the easy things easy, right? As you move from like, I'm running all of my book of business out of a Google Sheet. Well, okay, at a certain point, you need to get into a CRM, right? And you need to be establishing your drip campaigns or whatever it is that keeps those customers happy and satisfied. But if you do that too early and you establish too many processes, it's too rigid, right? So there's a lot of that sort of stuff that we focus on. The second thing that I'll say is the idea of a closed 10-year fund, which is typical, means that in years 5, 6, 7, you're starting to see liquidity. In 8, 9, and 10, you're starting to get scared because things aren't exiting, and you have to figure out how to move them through. So that's sort of a disconnect between startup founder, manager, meaning fund people, and investor, meaning the ultimate people who put the capital in. And so we've taken the approach of having an evergreen fund, means it doesn't have a time horizon. And we've taken the approach of permanent capital, meaning that at the end of each year, we top back up to the original amount that we had. The goal of that is twofold. One, create better alignment. And the idea there is time horizons become less important. You allow them to grow to the point where value is maximized and everybody feels like the exit timing is right with the market. And two, it allows for longer term bets, meaning things like that you realize are not going to mature in that time window. And so from an investment perspective, that actually allows you to a better diversified portfolio. So it's sort of a win-win. But the last thing I'll say is the challenge, and I've sat in the founder seat too and raised capital, is that when you go out and raise, most of the time right now, if you're not at $1 million ARR, the institutional capital is saying, hey, come back when you're at $1 million ARR and we'd love to talk more. We'd love to follow up with you until then. And so there's just not sufficient risk capital at that early stage, especially in Texas. If you go out to the coasts, certainly that's true. New York and California have much more of it. But so that's another aspect that we're trying to solve, and we tend to follow ourselves up from pre-seed, seed, A. So it's just a bit of a different approach, and we also believe, as Victoria mentioned, a very community mindset. That like the idea of there's a lot of resources that need to be coalesced around entrepreneurs to make it successful. And there's a lot that are not brought together and simply don't have the visibility. So we're working to create that through sort of a software platform, but more to come on that.
So Adam, I just wanted to ask you too, one of the elements that really galvanized Ecliptic Capital was the fact that you could see that there were so many hurdles for entrepreneurs who were hitting that first revenue juncture. Can you go a little bit more into really where all of the hurdles are at that first revenue milestone?
Yeah, so to that point, a lot of it is sort of figure it out work. And so that's messy, and rightly so. As you start to move into kind of a business operations and need to start to scale a little bit, the structural things come into play. So whether it's, budgeting and forecasting, whether it's having a defined sales process, whether it's, we need to implement tighter roles and responsibilities and actually have contracts with our employees, there's a lot of variety to it. The other thing that tends to happen, and it touched on earlier, is the idea that like what got you here won't get you there. And so what we've seen is in about 30%, maybe that's light, of the cases, one of the founders that was part of the original team decides that it's not for them anymore. And either through checking out and just not really being all in, or through actually saying the words, I'm struggling, I want to get out. And so like acknowledging that and knowing those sorts of changes happen, and that you maybe need to be a founder, it may be other people where you need to upskill, but being able to spot and recognize those inflection points is something that most people just don't have, right? They don't have the experience to do it. And that's not a bad thing, it's just a thing. And certainly that's like a broad generalization. People who may have experienced it before may spot certain stuff and not other stuff, right? But the idea is if you've been through enough of them, pattern recognition sort of helps you identify, ooh, I see what's going on here. We need to start to talk about this, right? And get down the implementation pathway. And that's really what we try to do, is just to be kind of the guide on the side. Sometimes we think of ourselves sort of as shadow co-founders in a way. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Victoria?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah, it's almost like we need internal to our teams some sort of, human version of machine learning to see all those patterns within the team, right? We're great at it when it comes to, the data science side and all of the computerized side, but really we need to implement a lot of that same theory to our teams.
Exactly. And like most of the challenge is like ultimately come down to people, right? People are complicated. and you know, you can kind of sort of predict what machines will do, but people less so. So, but there are patterns that you can recognize, and there are things that you need to implement at just the right times, or you end up making really things that should be sort of mundane stretch out and become more difficult.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Okay, great. All right, so I think we will wrap up this portion of the discussion and go to Q&A. How'd that sound? All right, so let's see here. So keep in mind, everybody, with the Q&A, you get a $25 gift card at the end. So let's see which one is the best. There's a question for Rochelle. Let's see, can an organization fighting with the same cause in a different link benefit from what you do and join with you?
100%. Human trafficking is way too massive of a problem for one team and one organization to solve it. And so I think number one, like our logo is a starfish, and we're deliberately talking all the time about being collaborative. We might be a national organization, but the legs of the starfish can move in the directions they see fit at a regional level. We collaborate with different national tech industries, nonprofits that are directly in trafficking or adjacent fields, and local agencies in the local jurisdictions we work with. And that collaboration, I think, makes us so much stronger and our solutions so much more responsive. So 100% yes. And info@collectiveliberty.org is an easy way. I'm really responsive on LinkedIn as well. I just saw that question pop up, so I just answered it.
Okay, great. And then let's see, any advice on how to keep your founding team bought in as the company scales and lessons learned for fast growing teams? I know, Rochelle, you addressed the fast growing team part a little bit earlier, but I think others of you have some experience with companies that have scaled a bit quickly. So who would like to take that one on, and then also talk about how to keep your team, you know, you're really instilling a lot of culture at this point early on, especially, and planting those seeds. So who would like to address how they've been ensuring that the culture is established, and how to keep everybody, you know, invested?
I can talk about that a little bit. I mean, we grew our headcount from 3 to, I think now we're 11 over the last 9 months. We brought on 4 new full stack engineers and, you know, grew the ops side of our team. I think one of the most important things that happened for us is not intentionally, like we just became like an asynchronous remote organization by default. A lot of the people that we were hiring, we were over indexing for talent and cultural fit, even over their technical ability or anything of that sort. Because we wanted to find people who were willing to grow over the long term. Even in our interview process, we had 2 steps. It was pretty straightforward, and we let them know right off the bat. You know, the first was a technical interview, and then the second, it was more of a cultural interview where we asked a lot of holistic questions about how they see themselves grow, you know, alongside or internally within this company, and how we can build the infrastructure to support them and launchpad them to their next role or next startup or, you know, next leadership opportunity within Canada itself. So, you know, definitely being a transparent organization has helped us a lot. I mean, everybody has access to, you know, we built a kind of a database, or like the Canada Brain on Notion, where they can get a lot of visibility into every single part of the company, from ops to sales to product to our roadmap to our financials and how much money we have left in the bank. I know that's a little non-traditional for companies, but we found that just having that transparency, especially as a remote organization, has helped a lot. But finally, I think, you know, when COVID really hit, and, you know, things were going really south, and then the world was pretty much upside down, we had an all hands meeting where at the end I just said, you know, and to Rochelle's point, like, it's okay to not be okay right now. You know, the one thing we can do is we can really believe in our mission. We know how we're helping people. You know, there are workers out here who are making rent because of the jobs that we're able to place them at. Let's build a good future that, you know, keeps helping more and more people get to their next milestone. And I know that is like a driving factor, and everybody has their own version of why they're passionate about the company, but the culture, the overall mission, and, you know, building an opportunity for them to be vocal about what they're thriving in, and supporting them, and, like, you know, recognizing them when they do, and what they're struggling with, hearing them out to provide them with help has been very helpful. So yeah, that's all the thoughts that I have.
I like that. And it's good too to see that you're really kind of straddling the leadership role and the tech side really well, because I think sometimes you find really, really strong technical founders, and you might find a really strong business leader, but it's really hard to find both combined into a founder, I think. So
Yeah, we're lucky. All three of our co-founders have scar tissue from launching a company before. So we're just doing everything we wish we did right last time.
Victoria, if I could add just one thing around the co-founder motivation piece that was part of the question, I think too, is that, like, look, as Rochelle said, like, sometimes one's up, one's down, right? Like, in terms of your founding team, and that's totally normal. But if you find yourself really regularly having to work to keep your co-founders engaged, that's a big red flag. Okay, and you need to listen to it, because it's not going to get better. So that's just something that I've found from personal experience, but I've seen numerous times since. So
that's a good point. And this next question I think would be best directed to you, Adam, as well. What's the most difficult VC negotiation term, or what is the most important term for founders to ensure to include in Series A term sheet?
Well, there's a big variety, right? So there's a lot of things that are quote normal, and then everything else is risk management. So one thing to think about as a founder is the investor is looking at your firm as a basket of risk. They're trying to quantify what are the risks and how do we calibrate against those risks. And so sometimes terms will be incorporated that are things related to specific goals you have, and like ideas like tranching investments. And that is a de-risker for the investor, and it's also a focus on execution for the founders. But I think one thing that people tend to get really, really hung up on, and rightly so, is the biggest term is valuation, right? Like at first priced round. The challenge is that typically at Series A, companies are very hard to value, right? And so the notional value that the founders have, it being their baby, is likely different than an investor who's basketing up the risk and trying to figure out what that risk means. And so I think the idea of being able to understand both sides of the table allows you to kind of mentally be a little bit more flexible about some of that stuff. What I will say is watch very closely on control terms. So, whether it's things like terms that cap your ability to raise additional capital, you just want to understand what those types of things are, and if you're willing to accept that, right? Because they can impede your ability to run your business if they're the wrong controls. And the idea is to go back and understand why are they there, because that's a flag too, right? They're telling you something by putting that term in, and it may be that they're the wrong investor, or it may be that you just don't understand why it's there and it needs to be explained so it can be negotiated out. So there's not really one thing to look for is the challenge, right? Valuation is obviously the biggest. The positive and negative controls. Specifically, you need to really watch the negative controls and see what negative controls they're putting in place. And then really having an open dialogue to get to something that's a mutually beneficial agreement where risks are understood and you're going in with eyes wide open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like too these days valuation is such a nebulous term, right? It becomes a negotiation between people to decide subjectively what it should instead of more of an equation.
Right. Well, and private equity, really upstream, there are metrics. There are core metrics to value a company off of that. This stage is still like, we have marginal amounts of revenue. We don't know how long that's going to repeat for. We don't know. There's a lot of variables, and so you have to account for those. And so, I can't count the number of times that I've had a startup come and say, my valuation is 10 million. And there's just not any real basis for it. And so that it becomes like a difficult conversation, especially if there's a big gap in belief, right? Mm-hmm. you know, our approach is like, let's just have the dialogue, because it's going to help them, even if they're like, screw you, we're walking. Like we've actually had that scenario where somebody went away and then they came back 6 months later and said, you know, you were really right. It was really good advice. You know, at the end of the day, you know, it's only valuable enough for somebody who's got to write the check, right? And they have to be on board with you. And you don't want to be so adversarial and get your valuation and then set yourself up for a down round.
Right.
Right.
Right. There, and a great question actually came through, which is off topic from here, but they referenced, in essence, I'm going to summarize, is how do you avoid becoming a serial incubator, accelerator hopper? You know, there are serial academics who just can't stop getting masters and PhDs, and then there are serial, I've seen them too, incubator and accelerator hoppers. So, and then at what point can you distinguish one from the other in terms of the impact and the outcomes they're creating? So I guess we could address this in two parts. One is how do you really kind of delineate which you're going to go for and why? And two, how has MassChallenge been a differentiator compared to ones that you're all aware of in the field? So maybe I'll turn this over to Brian. Brian, do you want to weigh in, and then Mandeep?
Sure. So we did two. We did a Capital Factory Accelerator and MassChallenge. For me, both of those added kind of distinct value. MassChallenge for me was, you know, meeting and going through some of the sessions. And I thought I knew most of this by my prior experience, but you always learn something in every conversation. And meeting the instructors and offline, I had a lot of calls with most of them on topics for me that I cared about, and they took the calls. So the huge value, I think, was kind of going deep in areas that I had challenges with. But for me, after those two accelerators, I didn't need any more coaching on how I thought to drive the business forward. So going to other accelerators that were approaching us to go join, who all or most wanted an equity piece, I felt wasn't worth it. Now, if there was an accelerator that was very targeted to my industry or my niche, that could have gotten me clients or market presence or mentors where I was headed, I might have done that. But I didn't find those. And we were really in the market trying to sell our product. So I wanted to get out there and spend my energy selling and working with customers. And the more times you do an accelerator, it takes the founder's energy and time. And you got to balance what's most important for you. And I wanted to get out there and start selling. So that's how I made, for me, the choice. I could have, like you said, accelerated hopped for years. But at some point, you've got to go for it.
Great answer. And then Mandeep, and I'd also like to field that to Farhaj, because you did do MassChallenge 2 years in a row. So I want to get your feedback too.
Yeah, I agree with Brian. Every accelerator you go into, there's an opportunity cost to that. So if they bring in a speaker, you're locked in for an hour and that speaker isn't properly vetted, that's a huge hit to you as the founder and your time. That's valued very highly. I did another accelerator called the Blackstone Launch Pad at the University of Texas. I'd say one thing that was really advantageous to that is they gave you a $10,000 grant at the start. So if you have issues with cash flow, if you're very early on in your company, it's really good to go for an accelerator like that, because you can actually test out the ideas that the mentors are telling you, as opposed to just being passive and not being able to do that. The key advantage to MassChallenge, I would say, that I did not take advantage of, that I wish I did, is all of the corporate partnerships. MassChallenge works with corporations to get their funding, and that's really powerful because those introductions can help you answer questions. As someone asked about product market fit, that's a great way to figure out whether you have product market fit, is to talk to a sponsor of an accelerator and see if they're like instantly get the value prop of your product, you're in it. The only red flag though, and caveat to that, is make sure you're talking to the right person, because they may not know whether or not there's a need for it. But yeah, that's the key advantage of MassChallenge, I would say. That's why I love the accelerator.
And then kind of one more comment also, which would be, have your attorneys look at the terms for the accelerator. A lot of them high terms are not founder friendly. So be careful with saying yes and signing stuff without your attorney looking at it, is my advice.
And I'll go through it quickly too. +1 Brian, +1 Mandeep. I think, fundamentally, especially if you're getting some sort of a capital investment, you have to really understand the risk to ROI ratio of the time that you're investing to go through the program. Is it really worth it if you're already a sophisticated founder who has an understanding of how to fundraise, has a pre-existing network? You have to look at what kind of offering can you actually take away from that accelerator. Is this a huge distribution opportunity? Is it strategically located in a city where they give you 50 grand for free and you can go and open a new market and understand your market economics? There are a lot of revolving factors, but personally, one of the reasons why I decided to go through MassChallenge a second time is because you can get upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars in new equity grants, and I wanted to take a shot at it. And also, if you're an incubator hopper, you're most likely not going to win that grant. A lot of what the round 2 of judging really looks at for your company is the amount of traction or progress that your company's made from the moment that you got into the program. So aside of that, I think the fact that it's an international program, the mentor network and how people actually take up your calls or a LinkedIn message and set up a time for a discovery session is amazing. And I think in the 2 times that I was able to go through, I 50x my network with a lot of influential people as a 21-year-old. So it was huge for me. So yeah, love the program. Can't sing enough praises.
I want to add too that you shouldn't be ashamed of doing multiple accelerators if that's the right decision. Like, definitely make the smart decision. I thought MassChallenge was enough. I wasn't going to do it again. And then some government GovTech focused accelerators reached out to me and I didn't even know they existed. And that's definitely the next stage for us. And having those specialized mentors is really blowing things open for us. So if it's the right fit, don't be ashamed if it's your second or third accelerator. It can be the right choice.
That's good feedback. Yeah, thanks everybody. And thanks for the robust discussion. Thanks very much to everybody. And I'll turn it over to Marisa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. We would like to remind everybody that on October 22nd, we will have our award ceremony, and I will put the link in right here, as well as our subscription. Please make sure to subscribe to MassChallenge newsletter. If any of you have any questions, we would love to hear from you. So you can contact us that way. Again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists. You guys did such a great job.